Let me refresh my page. Okay.
You should see it now.
Not yet. Anybody else there? I don't see it yet.
Anybody see it on YouTube?
Yeah, it just popped up on C
There.
screen.
Oh, I don't see it. Okay, you see it?
Yeah, it just popped up on Conrad Parler's screen.
Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks,
good.
Conrad. There.
Yeah, I still don't see it.
I think I'm sharing the screen. All right, everybody, salute. This is our Friday night conference. We created a flyer for it titled Law Prescribes War. It's a perfect title to me, dealing with the situation, our situation, not just the Palestinian situation, but the Palestinian situation, the situation in Palestine, the occupied Palestine that they falsely call Israel. It sheds light on revolution, war, human rights. It also should serve as a lesson for us and what we should be doing. Palestinians shouldn't be the only ones resisting. The law prescribes resistance for everybody whose human rights are being violated, especially their right of self-determination. And that's exactly what's going on in Palestine, and that's what's going on in America. We haven't enjoyed our right of self-determination since we were conquered and enslaved. And now we are attempting to assert that right, and we're still receiving forcible resistance. So this flyer says, law prescribes war. Local constitutions and international law resolutions state that rebellion, war against oppression is the responsibility of the victims. How do we engage in such to guarantee justice and reparations? And of course, all of us on this call, human rights policy officers, we know the real meaning of reparations. We know that reparations is self-determination. We know that the first principle part of reparations is being restituted, restored back to the condition that a people or a person was in before the human rights violation. So for black people to receive reparations, we have to be restored back to power, back to self-rule, self-government, back to enjoying our own sovereign rights. Then can come some compensation, if it comes, if they have the capacity to compensate us. But reparations, we know, is self-determination. And to get self-determination, oftentimes, you have to walk, or there's forcible denial, oftentimes, of that right. So the people who are asserting that right will have to engage in struggle. Hopefully non-violent, but oftentimes that struggle is violent. So we're going to point out how law prescribes war. How we should be warned, whether non-violent or violently, by any means necessary. Just like those people in Palestine should be following the law. They are following the law. The law says resist. I like to preface our meetings with some words from our dear leader, Dr. Martin Luther King, because we're carrying on that torch. A lot of people think they're carrying on the torch of Dr. King because they're out here protesting, call themselves civil rights leaders. But if you read Dr. King's words, some of his last words before the government of the United States assassinated him, you will understand that if you are trying to reform this government, if you're engaging in protests, etc., you are not carrying on Dr. King's work. You're not carrying on what he passed along. These are Dr. King's words. Am I sharing the screen, Comrade Malakia?
Not yet.
You're sharing.
We have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. Now, if we are to recognize this is a meeting he had in Frogmore, South Carolina in 1967. I think in late November, early December. They were planning for the Poor People's Campaign. But that actually was just a strategy meeting on changing directions and going in the right direction, because evidently they had realized after 12 years the direction that they were going in wasn't getting them to the destination of justice for black people and a changing of our conditions. So he said we have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. Now, if we are to recognize that we are in this new era, where the struggle is for genuine equality, we must recognize that we can't solve our problems until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. Let me skip down to the last paragraph. Now, when we see that there must be a radical redistribution of economic and political power, then we see that for the last 12 years, we have been in a reform movement. We were seeking to reform certain conditions in the house of our nation because the nation wasn't living up to the very rules of the house that it has prescribed in the Constitution. Then, after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. I think we must see the great distinction between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. This is Dr. King's word now. We didn't make this up. He said, after Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, those symbolized marching. That Selma was part of the height of those mobilization marches in different cities throughout America. And the Voting Rights Bill. So after voting, marching, he says it's cutting. It's not getting us anywhere. Because those are actions trying to reform, make the government be better, do better. It's not working. We can't reform this. So the new era, it must be revolution. Then they said, I think we got to see the distinction between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. Let's draw a line right now. Since we got engaged in revolution, anything dealing with a reform movement, we throwing it away. We don't want nothing to do with that. If it has to do with trying to make this government do right, we don't want to have nothing to do with it. That's what Dr. King was saying. Now, revolution means we're taking power. We're going to make things right ourselves. Revolution doesn't mean bloodshed. Doesn't mean violent. A revolution can be non-violent, but it involves taking power and putting the levers of justice in your own hands. Because evidently you can't reform this system to give you justice. Just Dr. King. The civil rights leader. They know him as a civil rights leader. He just said in this meeting, we're rejecting civil rights and the new era is human rights. Malcolm X had criticized King years earlier for being in a civil rights movement. But Dr. King didn't have an ego and say, because he's been criticizing me, I'm going to act like I'm right forever until I die. I'm going to still be a civil rights leader. Nah, he humbled himself and came to the conclusion that Malcolm was right. Can't fight for no civil rights under these people's jurisdiction, expecting them to reform themselves and do right. So now we're going to engage in human rights. That's out of his jurisdiction. We have natural human rights internationally recognized. And those rights state that if the government is not giving us justice, that we can give ourselves justice by any means. We're going to point that out in a minute. And during this meeting, Dr. King was planning called the Poor People's Campaign. Not the watered down version you see today. This is some words about the Poor People's Campaign you can find on Wikipedia. It says the Poor People's Campaign had complex origins. King considered bringing poor people to the nation's capital since at least October 1966, when welfare rights activists held their one-day march on the mall. I want to skip down. And it mentions the same meeting we're talking about where we got those quotes from, the Frogmore, South Carolina meeting. It says, in his concluding address to the conference, King announced a shift from reform to revolution. and stated, we have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. Let me skip down to this part here. King wanted the demonstration to be non-violent but militant, and as dramatic, as dislocative, as disruptive, as attention-getting as the riots, without destroying property. Not all members of the SCLC agreed with the idea of occupying Washington. Bayard Rustin opposed civil disobedience. Other members of the group, like Jesse Jackson, wanted to pursue other priorities. Dissent continued throughout the planning of the campaign. Meaning, they wasn't about that life. King was the only one. No, we shouldn't occupy D.C. They're going to get us. Like people tell us. We've all heard that as human rights policy officers. We said, we're going to take over Detroit. We're going to occupy it. We're going to assert our right of self-determination. They ain't going to let you do that. Dissent. That's why King said we got to distinguish a reform movement and a revolutionary. Between a reform and a revolutionary movement. Reform, they're going to try to better the situation. They're scared. Revolutionary movement is going to take matters in his own hand. You can't be scared. So they opposed Dr. King. Even though he was trying to be non-violent, they know that it would be some pushback. A revolution against a oppressive force is always going to be pushback. They didn't want that. They still want to try to reform the system. If the government is not going to do right by you from protesting and marching, and they're going to crack down on you for being civilly disobedient. If they don't, then what makes you think they're going to do it if you're not civilly disobedient? At least civil disobedience, non-violent or violent struggle, at least it has an objective. At least it will eventually get somewhere. But relying on the government to reform itself will get you absolutely nowhere. So these are the intentions of Dr. King. Revolution. War. Non-violent, though. But I'm sure if it would have got violent, because King did start allowing different protesters to carry guns. Just giving you all some context here to what our leadership, our sincere, bold, and courageous leadership, where they were going decades ago. And how it was disrupted, those ideas. Thrown away, cast to the side, and his own comrades followed the same course of reform that he abandoned in that meeting. And that's why today we're still going through the same hell. War. But the purpose of this, the topic today is the law prescribes war. War. You're not getting anywhere by trying to be civil with these people, but actually war is being civil. Law. Let's read from their law. See, white folks, I consider white folks being the only natural people in America. Natural meaning they are their natural selves. Black people, we're not our natural selves. We have been domesticated. We've been conditioned. They done put fear in us and all kinds of conditioning they have done. They have put us in a state of demoralization. Only people that stand up is white folks. As a whole. This is their mentality. This is how natural white people feel. I'm reading from the New Hampshire. Look at this. This is the New Hampshire state constitution. New Hampshire state constitution. But it's in many constitutions. The right to revolution is in at least 35 state constitutions. Look, it even says that. Can you see the screen, Comrade Malakia?
Yes, very clear.
What does that say right there? Article 10.
Okay, Article 10. Government being instituted.
No, what before that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Right of revolution.
Okay, that's all I want you to say. Right of revolution. You skipped the main part. Right of revolution. This is in a state constitution. Right of revolution. It says government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or emolument of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted, and public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual, meaning other means have not been effective at all, the people may, and of right ought to, reform the old or establish a new government. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive to the good and happiness of mankind. This is the State Constitution of New Hampshire. This was written in 1784. During that time, America was actually engaged in a revolutionary war. This country, called United States of America, was founded upon revolution, was founded upon resistance and rebellion against tyranny. So they made sure they put it in their state constitutions that, look, ain't nobody going to exercise tyranny and oppression over us. And if they start doing that and we try to seek means of redress that are peaceful, and if they are ineffective, then we have to do what we have to do. He said the doctrine of non-resistance, that's what black people, we ain't resisting at all. Even though the means we have been using, voting, protesting, have proven to be ineffective, we still refuse to resist. He said, against arbitrary power. Now, Comrade Dan, arbitrary power, man, they just took power. You didn't ask them to have power over you, they just took it over. You know, did our ancestors tell them to come and enslave us and take power over us, or was it arbitrary, Comrade?
Arbitrary.
It was arbitrary. So how can we be non-resistance against an arbitrary power that we didn't elect in the first place? This government is illegitimate in the first place. We're going to point it out in a minute. They're going to point it out themselves that they're illegitimate. I'm just pointing out how they think. This is their law. The right to resist and revolution. That's why white folks ran up in the Capitol building on January the 6th a few years ago or so. They said, we ain't going to let this government steal the election. And now it's proven that they interfered. Even with the hearings about Twitter. How they was blockading and censoring stuff and shutting down even government members of government shutting down their account, blocking their account. So them white folks ran up in that building looking for heads. They should have looked for heads. Took every head they could find. They should have. But that's them. I'm just saying, this is how they think. We domesticated, so we ain't going to resist at all. We think they were crazy for resisting. We're talking about war. Right, the war. It's time to war. That's what the conclusion Dr. King said. It's time for revolution, man. We can't reform this thing. Non-violent or violent. I'm sharing this document on your screen if you look at your screen. It's called The Status in International Law of National Liberation Movements and Their Use of Armed Force. The status in international law. See, we're talking about law on this call. We're human rights policy officers. We deal with international human rights law. What does that law say? We're not even talking about our natural inclinations, natural sentiments. We're talking about what the law says, which actually coincides with our nature. The status in international law of national liberation movements and their use of armed force. Published by who? Who published this? What does it say right there, Comrade Malaki? Can you see the screen?
I can see the screen. It says, maybe I can't.
Published by International
International Association of People's Lawyers.
International Association of People's Lawyers. So it's a publication published by lawyers. Lawyers. It didn't say International Association of Black Power Activists. It says people's lawyers. They're going to quote the law here. Let me just read a few things from here. There are different types of armed conflict to which the term wars of national liberation in terms of humanitarian law has been applied are those struggles of peoples fighting a foreign invader or occupant. Those that have evolved within the United Nations and identified from the practice of states and international organizations, namely colonial and alien domination or rule of government, and racist regimes, which according to Article 1, Paragraph 4 of the Protocol 1, are armed struggles aimed at resisting the forcible imposition or maintenance of such situations to allow people subject to them to exercise its right of self-determination. First of all revolution is based on self-determination. You can't say you're a revolutionary in America, yet you just want some at the ending of police brutality or police hearing their charge for their crime. No, if you're a revolutionary, you want your own police force. It's about self-determination. Malcolm said revolution is based on land. Having your own land, your own government and control. That's what the law states. Bear with me. Moreover, this classification of liberation wars as a category of armed conflicts is based not on morality, but on law. Y'all, morality tells us that we should fight as well. But he said, look, no, we're talking about the law here. The legal right to self-determination. That's why I'm telling all these different activists, if you really want to go to war with America, what are you warring for? Based on what? Based on you mad at the police killing somebody? If you mad at the police killing somebody, then you are trying to reform this system. You believe in this system. So you can't war against something that you agree with being a part of. Your war must be for self-determination. Otherwise, you agree with the system, so you can't war against it. You can try to reform it, but not war against it. You can't have a revolution against a system that you're trying to protest at the same time and vote in. Bear with me. I'll read a couple of statements from here. Today, it is common to recognize that all peoples have a right to self-determination. And as a necessary concomitant of national self-determination, they have a right to engage in revolution. As Professor Rich Reisman stated, the notion that only state institutions can permissibly use high levels of violent coercion is a crucial self-perception and deception of state elites. Thus, the useful question is not whether private violence is permissible, but what forms of private violence are permissible, when, in what social context, and why. He said, look, the notion to think that only governments can use violence, that's a deception of the state elites. Those who rule government want you to think that you can't engage in war. You can't engage in acts of violence. You can't shoot missiles. You can't throw bombs. Only the government can do that. No, that's a crucial self-perception and deception. So when we see a organization or individuals throwing missiles or bombs, we call them terrorists. Or they call them terrorists and want us to identify them as terrorists. So no, not only can the government use violence, people who are being occupied, people who are being oppressed can use violence as well. Bear with me. Insistence on non-violence and deference to all established institutions in a global system with many injustices can be tantamount to confirmation and reinforcement of those injustices. My God. Listen, insistence on non-violence and deference to all established institutions in a global system with many injustices can be tantamount to confirmation and reinforcement of those injustices. If you don't do something about it, you reinforcing those actions, and they're going to keep on doing it. You saying it's okay to keep doing it because you're not resisting. You're not getting violence against those who are violent against you. in certain, this I'm reading from, these are lawyers, professor of law making these words. In certain circumstances, violence may be the last appeal or the first expression of demand of a group or unorganized stratum for some measure of human dignity. Man, when you've been reduced to slaves, neo-slaves, minorities, being a minority is not dignity. A minor? That's not dignity. We've been reduced. But they can abuse you whenever they want to. Police can murder you and get away with it. You can get wrongfully convicted. They can assassinate your leaders and you do nothing about it. Violence sometimes is the only way to show some type of dignity left, if you have any left. Bear with me. We're getting somewhere. Let me share a few little highlights in this document. Two principles underlie human rights and humanitarian law. Two principles underlie human rights and humanitarian law. First, all peoples have a right to self-determination and a right to engage in revolution. Then it quotes from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Whereas it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. All armed actions and measures of repression of any type whatsoever against dependent peoples are to be halted in order to make it possible for them to peacefully and freely enjoy their right to full independence. The integrity of their national territory will be respected. Listen. Let me read this last highlight. Not that one. Page 10. Here we go. Talking about the General Assembly Resolution 2649. This is a resolution now. Matter of fact, I'm going to go to that resolution. Let me find the resolution. Bear with me. Here it is. Matter of fact, they got a copy of this resolution in this encyclopedia. And look what the name of the encyclopedia is. Interactive Encyclopedia of the Palestine Question. Now, this was published decades ago. Because they were having problems with Palestine then, 1970 now. Because since 1948, them Israelis been doing that, putting the Palestinians through the hell that they suffer from now. But in this resolution, United Nations General Assembly means all nations accepted this resolution. Number 1 says, affirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples under colonial and alien domination, recognized as being entitled to the right of self-determination, to restore to themselves that right by any means at their disposal. Now, the first means we have at our disposal is protest, standing up against it. Now we have the ability to hold a referendum. That's the means at our disposal. But when none of them are respected and they still practice violent repression against you, other means at your disposal become equal to what they are using against you. And this is what their law says. Bear with me. Show you what their law says. Am I still sharing the screen, Comrade Malaki, Comrade Dan?
Yes.
What does the blue writing say right there? Penn State? What does it say?
Penn State International Law Review.
Penn State International Law Review. Now, I'm getting all of this stuff from law universities now. These are lawyers speaking, by the way. But they know the law. It says the right of civil resistance under international law and the domestic necessity defense. I just want to read a few highlights. Yeah, bear with me. Bear with me. It's a few things. This new global order will be based on the primacy of the individual and will stress human rights, self-determination, ecological balance, and peace. He predicts that initially this global reform movement will take shape outside of and in opposition to the traditional centers of state power and will be populist and anti-governmental in character and origin. Falk urges international lawyers to turn their attention to facilitating the realization of this new global order rather than being content with clarifying. Don't just clarify and teach and talk about it. Help facilitate this revolution. That's what he's saying to lawyers, how lawyers should participate. Because on here we share documents of lawyers actually clarifying the right that we have to rebellion, the right we have to self-determination and rebellion if they try to deny us. But the lawyers should actually help us organize this. Give it some legitimacy because they are involved in it. Let me read further down. I have it highlighted. It is an implicit affirmation that individual human rights are independent of and transcend the limitations prescribed by a state's domestic legal system. Let me try to break this down. I hope that doesn't sound too lawyerly. It is an implicit affirmation that individual human rights are independent of and transcend the limitations prescribed by a state's domestic legal system. In other words, the state's domestic legal system have no jurisdiction over you when you are asserting your human rights. It transcends local domestic legal system. That's why Malcolm X said, we often share that speech on here. He said once you're dealing with civil rights, you're under Uncle Sam's jurisdiction. You're going to his courts. You're taking the criminal to his courts. You're relying the criminal to do right under a system that the criminal controls. So he's saying that, look, individual human rights, they transcend the limitations prescribed by the domestic system, by the nation's domestic legal system. I'm going to skip here right quick to show you, but this professor of law said the same thing in her subtitle here in this document called All Peoples Have a Right to Self-Determination, Henry J. Richardson III's Liberatory Perspective on Racial Justice. Her subtitle says this: notwithstanding oppression, subordinated peoples can have a jurisprudence on which they act without a dominating people or group's permission. The same thing, we're outside of the domestic legal system. We ain't got to ask them for permission to rebel against their system, to assert our right of self-determination, to take over our cities and govern them ourselves. We just do it. And if they try to resist, then we go to war. Go back to this other document. I'm just going to share a few things I highlighted in this. Well, nothing but 27-page read. This rebellion also ensures that the human personality will not become desensitized and lose its sense of outrage over inhumanitarian behavior. Listen, once that lion, when he's captured, when he stopped trying to rebel and get out of that cage, he's going to eventually become desensitized. That means you tamed. You're going to lose. The lion loses his outrage, so he just accepts it. I accept the inhumanitarian behavior. I accept being in the cage. So you got to keep on fighting to make sure you don't lose that. You don't become desensitized. But look at us as a people. We should have been going to war every year for 400 years. We should be at war every year, every month, every day. We should be in rebellion. Shouldn't be just no Nat Turner and the other rebellion. Should do it all the time. But now we become desensitized, tamed, domesticated. It says the rebel thus asserts that justice is so central that he or she is willing to die rather than to witness its abrogation or compromise. I like a scripture in the Quran that says that, a verse in the Quran says, oppression is worse than slaughter. I'd rather die than be oppressed, because it's your nature to have justice. It's central. But we've been so denatured, it's not central to us. It's no give us liberty or give us death. But it's central to white folks. That's why they said, give me liberty or give me death. They wasn't domesticated like we have been. Bear with me. We're going to breeze through this right quick. Bear with me. Bear with me. Okay, let me go down. Hold on. Respect for human rights, in fact, constitutes at once the aim and the justification for such resistance. And the notion of a right to resist violations of human rights is inseparable from human rights. My God. The notion of a right to resist violations of human rights is inseparable from human rights. The right to resist is not only based on human rights, but must be exercised in a fashion which it is consistent with the requirements of human rights instruments. The means of resistance must be proportionate to the gravity of the human rights which are being violated. And violent resistance may only be relied upon as a last resort in extreme situations, after all non-violent means of resistance have been exhausted. Those exercising various forms of non-violent protest and resistance are often subjected to severe formal and informal penalties. Let me close this out. Bear with me. I got this from a law university, Penn State University. Now, I didn't get this from Black Power University or anything. It's from Penn State University. Human rights treaties consistent with their purpose should be interpreted broadly and arguably impose duties and obligations on individuals as well as nation states to protect human rights. And this is written in 1990, but we're going to show what this actually came to fruition, what they're talking about. It said human rights treaties consistent with their purpose should be interpreted broadly and arguably impose duties. They're saying that the human rights resolutions themselves should make it a duty and an obligation for not just nation states, but to individuals to do something to protect human rights. Close out with this. In response to governmental oppression of authority, the people of a given community have the right under international law to alter, abolish, or overthrow any such form of government. Such a government would lack authority and could be overthrown in an effort to ensure authoritative government, self-determination, and the human right to relatively free and equal individual participation in the political process. A regime contrary to the authority of the people is actually an illegal regime, seeking to exercise power in violation of several interrelated international precepts. Hence, it has no right under international law to assure its survival. Let's talk about two nations here. That little, some call it a little bastard nation, America's bastard nation of Israel, call themselves Israel. Have no right under international law to existence, to survival. So people should be fighting for it, blowing it up, trying to destroy it. It shouldn't exist. And the reason why America can't really condemn the so-called state of Israel, because America is founded upon the same thing. So if they acknowledge the right of the Palestinians, they acknowledge the right of Afro-descendants and indigenous people to go to war with them and throw them off of this territory. That's the real reason they can't acknowledge that. They be putting a nail in their own coffin. They be throwing the book at themselves. Because they're both the same. I found it out with dealing with a certain government, trying to get them to acknowledge our self-determination. He said, no, if we acknowledge your self-determination, then we'll be giving a certain population in our country the right to do the same thing. So America can't speak up for the Palestinians, because that means they'll be speaking up for indigenous and Afro descendants in America. They can't condemn Israel because they'll be condemning themselves. Because both of them have no right under international law to assure their survival. Now back up to this statement here. It says human rights treaties consistent with their purpose should be interpreted broadly and arguably impose duties and obligations on individuals as well as nation states to protect human rights. This was around 1990. This thing was published some years ago. But after that, in 1998, the United Nations actually did come up with such a declaration. If you look at your screen, I'm sharing that declaration. It's called the Declaration on the Right and Responsibility of Individuals, Groups, and Organs of Society to promote and protect universally recognized human rights and fundamental freedoms. Individuals. That means an individual can do something. An individual, wherever he may be, in America or in Palestine, so-called Israel, can do something, can go and shoot up those Israelis. Because he has a right to protect universally recognized human rights, and their rights have been violated ever since 1948. United Nations already have acknowledged that. But nobody's going to fight against them, so they have a right to fight themselves. It's already been acknowledged that black people in America are in a humanitarian crisis because of a violation of the American government. It's acknowledged that they owe us reparations. If they're not going to do it, then as individuals or groups, we have a right to take it from them. Give ourselves reparations. And if they resist, as we shared in that document, the status, if they resist, it says, look, the resolution affirms the legitimacy of the struggles of people under colonial and alien domination. Alien domination means the people who are not your people that dominate you. It says recognize as being entitled to the right of self-determination to restore to themselves that right by any means at their disposal. So if the only means we got is a rocket, there's a bomb, there's a gun, then we got to use that. Palestinians have to use that. Indians have to use that. Asians have to use that. South Americans have to use that. Whatever's at their disposal. It says not just a right, it's your responsibility. It's the responsibility of those of Hamas to keep its people from being murdered day in and day out, as they've been victimized for 75 years. It's our responsibility to make sure our families living right in America. We've been abused for 400 years over there. Who else gonna do it? Who else's responsibility is to look out for our children in our community, for our future, for our posterity? Whose responsibility is it? If we can't get it, like King said, from reform, then we gotta turn the revolution. This is not a game. As they stated, a rebel would rather die. A natural person would rather die than be oppressed. Because justice is part of their nature. It's central in their makeup. So when you don't receive justice, you get frustrated, you get depressed, you get a feeling of you being crushed, you're being killed. So you gotta fight and resist it. But if you're unnatural, like we've been domesticated, you don't even feel the oppression. You don't even feel the fact that, look, a group of people then took you over, enslaved you, and now make you a minority in their system. Nobody feels like that. Nobody's domesticated like that on the planet besides us. So what's the prescription to get out of this? The prescription is to assert our rights, and if they deny those and try to forcibly deny our right of self-determination, then we gotta go to war. We gotta fight. We gotta resist. There's no other way out of this situation. There's no other way. I wish there was a peaceful way. That's our nature's peace as well, though. That's our real nature's peace. So we don't want to resist. But when that peace is disrupted, I can't be at peace when I know I'm in a system of injustice. I know that they can do whatever they want to my people. How can I be at peace? So sometimes in order to get peace, you have to create war. If you want peace in America, like King said, we got to engage in revolution. We want to make it nonviolent, but if they take it there, then we take it there. Let me read a few words, and then I'm going to close this out from this document from this professor of law at Georgia State University, Natsu Taylor Saetu. Notwithstanding oppression, subordinated peoples can have a jurisprudence on which they act without a dominating people or group's permission. She set the tone right there. Said, look now, what I'm about to teach you all, I downloaded this from Temple University Law School website. This is a professor of law talking like this. Because lawyers know. They know what we have a right to do. We don't have to ask them. That's the first. So she said it all first by saying, look now, what I'm about to teach you all, you ain't got to ask no permission. It's your right. You don't ask permission to assert your rights. You just do it. She writes this. Are African Americans and other peoples of color in the United States engaging in or even considering decolonization? Are we moving toward genuine liberation rather than simply asking for superficial adjustments to the status quo? In other words, will we take our right to self-determination seriously and act on it? That's what Dr. King said. No, it's a reform revolution. Are we satisfied with a little superficial adjustments from a voting rights bill? That's what he said. That's a superficial adjustment. They don't change our condition. That's not genuine liberation. We satisfied with getting a lawsuit from police brutality? We got to take our right to self-determination seriously, but first we got to know what a right to self-determination is. It's our right to stand up and govern ourselves and take over where we live and be independent. He spells that out. According to the 1970 Declaration of the Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relation and Cooperation Among States, the establishment of a sovereign and independent state, comma, that's one way of asserting the right. The establishment of a sovereign and independent state, the free association or integration with an independent state, or the emergence of any other political status freely determined by a people constitute modes of implementing the right of self-determination of that people. Meaning we could create our own independent nation, whether it be in Detroit, in Jackson, Mississippi, Baltimore, Mayberry, wherever we at as a people. Even if it's the south side of Chicago. In other words, she writes, self-determination can take many forms, but they all involve empowerment rather than equal treatment at the hands of the state. We talk about empower, moving with power. We have power to do something. That's empowerment. When you assert your right of self-determination. Now, when you ask and try to protest, you're giving power to them to treat you right or not treat you right. When you have the power to treat yourself right. Let me end this. She writes, the question becomes, this is our question too. What will it take to sustain and grow movements capable of fundamental liberatory change? First of all, like Dr. King said, you got to change from civil rights to human rights. You got to change from trying to reform this thing, because you're not going to bring any change that way. Change from reform to revolution. She writes, should we choose to move beyond demands for equitable treatment and frame our struggles in terms of decolonization and self-determination, he has laid the foundation for us. Professor Richardson does not presume to undertake that task for us, for by definition, one cannot dictate how others should exercise their right to self-determination. Rather, he identifies tools available in international law to aid us in that process. All he could do as a lawyer, all he choose to do anyway, clarify, show us the law, and we should act upon it. Look, we have a right to do this. people showed Dr. King the law, and Dr. King said, "Oh, we got these civil rights laws. Oh, I'm going to act upon it. I'm going to protest. We're going to do sit-ins, whatever." He acted upon the knowledge that he received of the law. Same thing we should be doing. We know we have a right to reparations. We know we have a right to give ourselves reparations. We know we have a right to take over our cities and govern them independently. So we should stand up and assert that right. But as these different documents and legal professionals and professors stated, along with that right comes a right to war if they try to deny that right. It's on us. Now, what we gonna do? What we gonna do? We gonna continue the process of oppression that we've been living through for hundreds of years? Or are we gonna rebel against that? It's either or. You only got two choices. You either accept it or you resist it. Resisting it, that's war. The law prescribes war. The law says you have a responsibility to war against injustice, to war against human rights violations. Responsibility, not just a right. It's our responsibility to resist. It's unfortunate that, of course, a majority of leaders, like the leaders that were with King, they didn't want to resist. But the few that do want to resist must continue and push and organize resistance. That's us on this call right now. Other groups that look the part, they don't want to resist. I'm not hyping us up, acting like we are special. We are, yeah, I'm going to hype us up. We are special because nobody else going to resist. But the few people on this call right now, thousands of men can march in the middle of nowhere with guns, but when you ask them to come and resist, they know where to be found. So it's us and the poor people human rights policy officers. It's us and the poor masses, the oppressed masses. It's up to us to organize resistance, to let the people know they have a right to resistance. They have a right to war. By any means available. As Malcolm said, by any means necessary. That's not a Malcolm X quote. That's a human rights quote. So officers, it's up to us. We have a job ahead of us. We're in that job. We're doing that job as we speak. But now we're at a critical point where they're showing their colors. They've been showing their colors. And now are we going to just respond by non-resistance, which the white folks' New Hampshire state constitution says is slavish? You're a slave if you don't resist. You're a willing slave. I know I'm not a slave, so I'm resisting. So we have a right to war, brothers and sisters, comrades, those who may be listening on the live. How do you resist? Number one form of resistance is asserting the right of self-determination. Asserting the right of self-determination. Comrade Devin said plantation rebellion. This is plantation rebellion. That's how you resist. You assert your right of self-determination. How you assert the right of self-determination? The formal way is like we have been doing in places like Detroit. You hold a vote and ask the people, do they want to be independent? If they say yes, then you just start governing it. If you get any resistance or denial of your governing of that territory after the people have spoken, then you have a right to rebel, fight against that denial with any means you have available. And sometimes that availability will be in the form of armed rebellion. Armed rebellion. We're going to end that with that. We're going to open up the floor for discussion. Any comments? Bear with me. We've entered the discussion phase of this. Comrade Dan, go ahead and give us a couple of guidelines so everybody can know.
Yes, sir. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your participation. As Comrade Ramzu and we all agree, this is the only guaranteed solution to our situation. And as you see, there's all laws grant us this right. And the number one law is human rights, not just the right of self-determination, but human rights. But this is how what we try to do here to make sure everyone gets the opportunity to ask questions if they would like to ask a question or give comment. So what we ask you to do is if you have a question, you ask your question or you highlight your mic, ask your question, then go back on mute. Wait till your question's answered by Comrade Ramzu only. That's either in the chat or verbally. That means no one else is to answer these questions that is being asked. You can communicate or discuss that question if you don't understand it, but only Comrade Ramsey is to answer. Also, if you don't want to speak verbally, you can put it in the chat and it will be read. Your comment or question will be read out by Comrade Malaki. But the one thing we will not be doing here is talking about what they're not going to let us do. Because with all you've heard from these law professors and international law bodies and Temple University, we have 100% authority and right. It's just up to us to go ahead and take control and put forth the effort to do it. So no fear is allowed on this conference. But I need everyone to make sure you share this information. It's one thing to hear it and know it, but if you don't share it and pass it along to your family and friends, it's just useless information. So we must get out, share, communicate, discuss exactly what you've heard here and bring them to the next conference, which will be next Friday for the Reparations 1 and also Saturday for NAPO. That's the North Atlantic Peace Organization, which is even more detrimental to us. Not more important, but it's more detrimental because of what's going to be coming to this country if we don't, get this done. And that will be discussed on Saturday. I thank you for your participation. We appreciate you standing up, being one to take a stance. We salute you.
Thanks, Comrade Dan. Any questions, any comments, any input?
Yeah, salute, comrades. Comrade Ramzu,
Yes, sir.
that was profound, phenomenal. I hope that we share this. I hope that we can, post this meeting that you just had because when you speak you don't speak like that. You only speak like that to us most of the time, but when you speak to the public, you don't speak with that force, like with all that information and force. And that was just so much and right on point. I hope that we can share this.
Thanks, Comrade K-Man. We actually streamed it to YouTube, so it's going to be on my YouTube page. You can share it.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Any other comments? Any? Jack Nabay, is your mic open? You have something? Or he's not even there.
He might.
Oh no, I see him right there. He have two things. Damn, is that you was kicking him off the call? I don't know if you're doing that by mistake.
No, I was doing it intentionally because he had two screens up, but one screen had no name, no picture, no nothing. And I didn't know why. I wanted to talk to him about that right here and now.
No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's an open meeting. Doesn't matter. It's not a human rights policy officer meeting, a private meeting.
Do you mind explaining why you had the two screens?
Yes. I have by the way, hi everybody.
Salute, brother.
Comrades. Salute. Alright, so I have two phones that are connected to each other. My iPhone 11 is its iOS number is connected to my iPhone 7.
my iPhone 7 is not in my possession right now. So 2 screens, probably because one of my phones is connected to 2.
Okay. Even though it really don't matter. Malaki got 2 screens up. But yeah, thanks for that explanation, brother.
Gratitude.
Any other questions? Any comments? You see anything on? Go ahead, brother Jegna. Come right.
Thank you. Yeah, before I got kicked out, I didn't get to hear your measure on what we are to how we are supposed to assert.
Oh, okay. No, I was saying how you assert that is how everybody asserted. Just hold a referendum of asking the people, do they want to be independent? If the people say yeah, then you assert that independent control over whatever territory. And if they oppose that and try to forcibly deny that, then you meet force with force. That is a struggle or a war, some may call it. It's a liberation.
And on the website, the voting application, I got a couple of those printed. Cause I study a lot. All I do is read. You know what I'm saying? I love to read. And so I do have those forms printed out because I'm ready to be active. I'm active already. Like I've already won in court before. I've disqualified a judge and prosecutor in a state that I was only in for a week. You know what I'm saying? They arrested me over something that had nothing to do with me. I had no documents, no IDs, no paperwork, and I got myself out of the situation lawfully.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm ready to go, man. I got fire, got the zeal. You know, I'm 29 years old. I've been woke since I was 18 years old. My family's, you know what I'm saying, they looked at me crazy for a long time, but now since it's affecting them, now they're all like, okay, yeah, what should we do? And, you know what I'm saying? So I have family that's, you know, behind me, supporting me, and I'm taking this so serious. You know what I'm saying? Man, I'm just ready. You know what I'm saying? I'm familiar in my town. The officials in my town, they know who I am. Not for nothing bad, but you know, for community work, for school stuff and stuff like that. So yeah,
good.
I'm just ready to just really just get this going because, man, this. I know too much too. You know, I've done a lot of research and studying. I just know a lot of the harsh conditions. You know what I'm saying, that we've been we consented to, just unknowingly, blindly, uneducated. You know, just not knowing, just lack of information, lack of knowledge, lack of spirituality. However, I'm just, you know, I'm here to, you know, also be another, you know, force of justice.
Thanks, brother. Thanks, comrade. We appreciate you.
And I yield.
We appreciate you. We're with you. All of us are together in this struggle. That's what makes us strong. So we'll help you get more understanding as you get on the more calls, and also to push the message in your area, also in your town. This is it's a matter of awareness for our people. Our people don't know what they can do. It's like being Superman, but you don't know you're Superman. All you think is Clark Kent. You don't know you have the powers of Superman. So our people don't know they have powers and rights that they can enact. I always mention how 100 years or so ago, you could find a town of 1 million people, 1 million black people, 15 white people, but the 15 white people were the ones governing the town because the black people didn't know they had rights. So they just allowed it to be. Somebody cracked open the books and said, hey, hold on now, we can govern ourselves. We're the majority, we can become the mayors, etc. Now 100 years later, you got 600, 800 black mayors and city councils across America. So now we got to realize we have a further right of self-determination. We have human rights. We can go beyond civil engagement and civil rights engagement. We can actually repair ourselves, give ourselves reparations, stop injustices ourselves. So that's what we have to make the public aware. If there was an awareness of such right, such, for instance, when George Floyd was assassinated by police, all those millions of people that hit the streets, they would have hit the streets and not go back home. They would have hit the streets and took control of those cities. It would have took Minneapolis under control, at least the black part of it. They did create a little small autonomous zone there, but it just wasn't equipped with the knowledge. So that's our duty as human rights policy officers, to spread the knowledge, the awareness of human rights, and then help our people to assert that. And of course, last but not least, to defend against any opposition, war, or rebellion against any forcible denial. Any other questions, any comments? You see anything on the YouTube, Comrade Malakia?
There's no questions in YouTube.
Okay, good. So before we close out, any comments, questions, critiques? If not, we'll see everybody. We'll be on here tomorrow at.
Salute. Yep. Only one me. I got a comment and a critique.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to the two screens, I just want to be make sure I comprehend right where you said it doesn't matter. For instance, I see where it doesn't matter because this is a public call. You are streaming on YouTube and sometimes Facebook and so forth like that. However, say for instance, one day we were not on a public call. It was a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, Comrade Jinga Bay, if he's got two devices, we definitely need to know the circumstances of those two devices if we're on a Tuesday call. And then the other thing, you mentioned Malakia has two screens. Malakia is a moderator.
Mm-hmm.
No one else other than yourself and Comrade Dan are moderators.
Mm-hmm.
So that is her purpose for having two screens. And nobody else does that but y'all. So I just wanted to point that out in regards to that. All right. Peace.
Yeah, like I said, it's not a Tuesday's call. I don't care if somebody has 50
Right. But, we don't know. Just for future reference, we're saying. So.
Yeah, my whole point, since I started that, my whole point was that Comrade Jenkins, you didn't mention reasons or purpose, which not that you have to, but we kind of be.
Well, if you don't have to, then why are you bringing it up?
Due to the reason that things are a lot different than they were, and it's just that there's never been a revolution that hasn't had certain situations, and I'm not going to say it because I don't want to put that out there. There's never been a revolution, and you know that as well as I do. So I'm just cautious about any activity that goes on where any information can go anywhere.
I hope this information goes everywhere. I hope it does. But this is an open call. It's an open call. It's open because we have nothing to worry about. We open it up for the public.
And I just want to welcome again Comrade Dinga, and I appreciate his commitment and ready to do the work and everything. That's good stuff in the community, so forth and so on, and has made substantial changes for himself in regards to injustices in the law regarding himself individually. And I'm certain that he can pass that along to other members across this nation that may need your assistance. Salute.